They put me in a nursing home to steal my house, but I owned the nursing home. 79-year-old Florence Baker thought she was being betrayed by her family when they forced her into Golden Years Manor nursing home against her will. But what her greedy relatives didn't know was that Florence owned the nursing home and had been watching their scheme unfold for months. It started when Florence suffered a mild stroke at age 78. The stroke affected her left arm slightly, but left her mind completely sharp and her ability to live independently largely intact. However, her son Marcus and daughter-in-law Denise saw the stroke as an opportunity. They had been waiting for. Marcus and Denise had been struggling financially for years, despite both having decent jobs. They lived beyond their means, carried significant credit card debt, and had borrowed money from Florence multiple times over the past decade. They also knew that Florence owned her house outright, a beautiful four-bedroom colonial worth approximately $500,000 in an upscale neighborhood. Plus, she had substantial savings and investment accounts. After Florence's stroke, Marcus and Denise began pressuring her to consider assisted living, claiming they were worried about her safety. Living alone, they suggested that she should sell her house and use the proceeds to pay for professional care. Florence initially resisted. She felt fine living in her own home with some minimal help from a part-time aide, had hired the aide, came 3 times a week to help with grocery shopping, heavy cleaning and transportation to medical appointments. But Marcus and Denise escalated their pressure campaign. They began calling Florence multiple times daily, asking if she had fallen, if she had remembered to take her medication, if she had eaten proper meals. They also started showing up unannounced to check on her, finding fault with everything from the cleanliness of her kitchen to the organization of her medicine cabinet. Most manipulatively, they began bringing Florence's grandchildren to visit and coach the children to express worry about grandma's safety. Living alone, 8-year-old Sophie would say, "Grandma, we don't want you to fall down again." 12-year-old Michael would ask, "Why don't you want to live somewhere safer where people can help you?" Florence realized that Marcus and Denise were using emotional manipulation involving the grandchildren to pressure her into giving up her independence. But the real revelation came when Florence overheard a phone conversation between Marcus and Denise that revealed their true motives. Florence had been napping in her living room when Marcus and Denise arrived for one of their check-in visits. They thought she was sleeping and began talking quietly in the kitchen about their financial problems. Denise said they were behind on their mortgage payments and facing possible foreclosure. Marcus mentioned that his credit cards were maxed out and needed a significant amount of money quickly. Then Denise said something that made Florence's blood run cold. "If we can get Mom into a nursing home, we can sell her house and use the money to solve all our problems." Marcus agreed, saying that once Florence was declared incompetent to live alone, could get power of attorney and control all her assets. They discussed which nursing homes they should consider, emphasizing that they needed to find one that was expensive enough to justify selling Florence's house, but not so expensive that it would drain her assets too quickly. Florence listened in horror as her son and daughter-in-law planned to institutionalize her against her will in order to steal her property and savings. But what Marcus and Denise didn't know was that Florence had been much more than a housewife during her working years. She had been a successful businesswoman who quietly built a substantial portfolio of investments, including real estate. Florence had started her career as a nurse, but had quickly moved into healthcare administration. She had worked her way up to become the administrator of several nursing homes and had eventually started her own health consulting business. Over the course of 30 years, Florence had built relationships with healthcare investors and had been part of ownership groups for multiple care facilities throughout the region. When Florence retired 15 years earlier, she had sold her consulting business, but had retained ownership stakes in several properties, including a nursing home called Golden Years Manor. Golden Years Manor was a mid-level facility that provided adequate care at reasonable prices. It wasn't the most luxurious nursing home in the area, but it was well managed and had a good reputation. Owned 60% of Golden Years Manor through a holding company that she had established years earlier. The other 40% was owned by her business partner, Harold Chen. Most importantly, Florence served on the board of directors for Golden Years Manor and had significant input in admissions policies, staffing decisions, and resident care plans. Marcus and Denise had no idea about Florence's business background or her ownership of healthcare facilities. They saw her only as an elderly woman with assets they could access. 2 weeks after Florence overheard their conversation, Marcus and Denise arrived at her house with papers they wanted her to sign. Marcus explained that they had researched several assisted living facilities and had found one that they thought would be perfect for her. The facility was Golden Years Manor, and Marcus had already spoken with the admissions coordinator about availability. Denise added that they had calculated the costs and determined that Florence would need to sell her house to afford the monthly fees, which were approximately $8,000. Florence pretended to consider their proposal while internally marveling at the irony of the situation. They were trying to force her into a nursing home that she actually owned. She told Marcus and Denise that she needed time to think about such a major decision and asked them to give her a week to consider all the options. During that week, Florence called Harold and explained what was happening. Harold was shocked to learn that Florence's own family was trying to manipulate her into institutional care for financial gain. Florence and Harold developed a plan that would allow Florence's family to proceed with their scheme while ensuring that Florence maintained complete control over the situation. First, Florence would agree to tour Golden Years Manor, and eventually consent to admission. This would satisfy Marcus and Denise and allow them to believe their plan was working. Second, Harold would ensure that Florence received the best possible care accommodation at the facility, including a private room and personalized attention from staff. Third, Florence would use her time at Golden Years Manor to document her family's behavior and gather evidence of their financial manipulation. Finally, when the time was right, Florence would reveal ownership of the facility and expose Marcus and Denise's scheme to steal her assets. The following week, Florence told Marcus and Denise that she had decided to tour Golden Years Manor and consider their suggestion. Marcus and Denise were delighted and immediately scheduled an appointment with the admissions coordinator. During the tour, Florence played the role of a concerned elderly woman evaluating care options. She asked appropriate questions about services, amenities, and costs. The admissions coordinator, who was aware of Florence's ownership but had been instructed to treat her like any other prospective resident, provided a thorough and professional presentation. Florence told Marcus and Denise that she was favorably impressed with Golden Years Manor and would consider moving there if they could work out the financial arrangements. Over the next month, Marcus and Denise pressured Florence to commit to the move. They brought real estate agents to evaluate her house. They researched the legal requirements for selling property on behalf of an elderly parent, and they prepared the paperwork for Florence's admission to Golden Years Manor. Florence continued to play along, expressing reluctance, but eventually agreeing to their plan. She signed the admission papers and agreed to move into Golden Years Manor within 30 days. During this time, Florence also documented every conversation with Marcus and Denise, recording their statements about selling her house, using her money, controlling her assets. She also gathered evidence of their financial problems, including overdue bills, collection notices, and mortgage documents that they had left at her house. 30 days later, Florence moved into Golden Years Manor with great ceremony. Marcus and Denise helped her pack belongings, toured the facility with her, and expressed satisfaction that she would be safe and well cared for. They immediately began the process of selling Florence's house, listing it with a real estate agent, and preparing for a quick sale. Florence settled into her private room at Golden Manor and began enjoying the irony of being a resident at a facility she owned. The staff, who were aware of her true status, provided excellent care while maintaining the appearance that she was just another resident. Florence used her time at the nursing home to observe the quality of care, document facilities, operations, and plan her eventual revelation. Meanwhile, Marcus and Denise proceeded with selling Florence's house. They found a buyer within 2 weeks and scheduled a closing for the following month. They also began making plans for how they would use the proceeds from the house sale, solve their financial problems, and pay for Florence's long-term care. 6 weeks after Florence moved into Golden Years Manor, the house sale was completed. Marcus and Denise deposited the $500,000 proceeds into a bank account they had established for managing Florence's affairs. They immediately used $50,000 to catch up on their mortgage payments, pay off credit card debt, and cover other personal expenses. They justified these expenditures by claiming they were reimbursing themselves for Florence's care expenses, but Florence knew they were stealing her money. 2 weeks after the house sale, Florence decided it was time to reveal the truth. She scheduled a meeting with Marcus and Denise at Golden Years Manor, claiming she wanted to discuss her care plan and financial situation. Marcus and Denise arrived at the nursing home confident that their plan had been successful. They had sold Florence's house, accessed her money, and positioned themselves to control her remaining assets. Florence greeted them in the conference room that was typically used for family meetings about resident care. Also present were Harold Chen, Marcus and Denise, assumed was a facility administrator, and attorney Patricia Rodriguez, who Florence introduced as the nursing home's legal counsel. Florence began the meeting by thanking Marcus and Denise for their concern about her welfare and their efforts to ensure she received appropriate care. She also thanked them for handling the sale of her house and managing her financial affairs during her transition to assisted living. Then Florence said she had some information to share that would help them better understand her situation and future care needs. She explained that during her working years, she had been more than just a nurse. She had been a successful healthcare entrepreneur who had built a substantial business portfolio. Marcus and Denise listened with growing confusion as Florence described her background in healthcare administration and her involvement in nursing ownership. Then Florence delivered the revelation that changed everything. She explained that she was actually the majority owner of Golden Years Manor, and had been since the facility opened 15 years earlier. The silence in the room was deafening as Marcus and Denise processed what they just learned. Florence continued explaining that she had been aware of their plan to force her into a nursing home and steal her assets from the beginning. She had allowed them to proceed with their scheme while documenting their behavior and gathering evidence of their financial manipulation. Harold Chen then presented a detailed accounting of all the financial transactions related to Florence's house sale and the subsequent use of those funds. Patricia Rodriguez explained that Marcus and Denise had potentially committed elder abuse, fraud, and theft by taking control of Florence's assets under false pretenses. Florence then revealed that she had been recording conversations and had extensive documentation of their statements about selling her house and using her money for their personal benefit. Marcus tried to argue that they had been acting in Florence's interests, but the evidence of their self-serving motives was overwhelming. Denise attempted to claim that they had misunderstood the situation, but Florence had recordings of them explicitly discussing how they would use the money from her house sale to solve their financial problems. Rodriguez then informed Marcus and Denise that they had two options. They could voluntarily return all of Florence's money and submit to financial oversight, or face criminal charges for elder abuse and fraud. She also explained that Golden Years Manor would be terminating Florence's residencies. She had never actually needed institutional care and had only been there to expose their scheme. Marcus and Denise chose to return the money rather than face criminal prosecution, but they were required to repay not only the funds they had taken, but also additional penalties and Florence fees. 6 months later, Florence was back in her own home, living independently with minimal assistance. She had used the experience at Golden Years Manor to evaluate the quality of care at her own facility, and had implemented several improvements based on her observations as a resident. Marcus and Denise's relationship with Florence was permanently damaged. They had revealed their willingness to institutionalize her against her will and steal her assets for personal gain. Florence decided to remove them from her will and estate planning instead, leaving her assets to her grandchildren, then used as pawns in their parents' scheme. She also established a trust fund that would provide for the grandchildren's education and future needs, while ensuring that Marcus and Denise could never access those funds. The story of Florence outwitting her family by owning the nursing home they tried to force her into became well known in the healthcare and legal communities. It served as a cautionary tale about elder abuse and the importance of elderly people maintaining control over their own financial affairs. Florence continued to live independently for several more years, proving that her family concerns about her ability to care for herself had been manufactured to justify their scheme. She also became an advocate for elderly rights, speaking at conferences and community events about financial exploitation and family manipulation. Florence's story demonstrated that being elderly did not mean being vulnerable, that business experience and financial knowledge don't disappear with age, and that sometimes the best defense against family betrayal is information they don't know you have. Golden Years Manor continued to operate under Florence's ownership, providing quality care to residents who actually needed institutional support. The facility became known for its strong policies against family financial manipulation and its advocacy for resident rights and autonomy. Florence Baker proved that quiet strength combined with business acumen can triumph over family greed. Ownership, information, can be a powerful weapon against those who underestimate you, and that sometimes the best way to expose a scheme is to let the schemers think they have succeeded before revealing that you've been in control. all along. Her legacy lived on as an example of how elderly people can protect themselves from financial exploitation by maintaining their business connections, legal knowledge, and strategic thinking, regardless of age. The nursing home that Marcus and Denise thought would be Florence's prison became the stage for their downfall, proving that when you try to trap someone who owns the trap, you're likely to be the one who gets caught.